Joining me now in studio to discuss the matter are Tal Granot, founder and co-director of Her Academy, an NGO providing professional training for survivors of prostitution, and Karen Kirsch, a journalist and social activist. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you.
So, Tal, we're going to start with you. What would you say, what kind of support is required for women who are trying to get out of prostitution?
So as long as I'm in the business, as we said, we find that the needs are enormous. They have like all the needs that all human being needs, like housing and you know, food and those foundational stuff. But above that, they need sometimes special health care. They need a lot of psychological
treatment.
A lot, because the damage is so. It's so great and enormous, and they need...
this is, I mean, psychological treatment that's probably lifelong.
Yeah, I just read a research that says that a woman needs rehabilitation that's equal to the time that she was in prostitution in order to actually get real rehabilitation. But yeah, and sometimes women are like 20 years in prostitution, so the needs are so
are equal to that time.
Yeah, and as long as I work in Her Academy, we the most disturbing things that we understand is that as you know, more than 90% of women who are in prostitution were damaged at childhood and had sexual abuse. Yeah, and that hurt is so bad. And that's
that
what
it brings them back into the cycle
exactly
of violence.
all the time, even after they get, you know, all the help and they know that they're good. Yeah, and
they're easily sucked back into it because of their personal background. Karen, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the background and how big the Israeli sex industry is.
Well, the sex industry in Israel is huge. There are between 11,000 to 12,000, depending on which numbers, of women who pursue prostitution at each time. But I think that what's important to say is that only around 600 women get some kind of support from social services.
And why is this?
Because there are no budgets. I think right now there's something like 20 million shekels invested in that per year, which is absolutely nothing. And even that would be up to a certain point. So you'll get help when you come out of prison. You'll get help, which a lot of prostitutions end up finding themselves in prison, not necessarily for practicing in the sex industry, but because of drugs, because of stealing, because of other kinds of issues, and that's something that, you know, then they finish whatever the social services offer them, and they're
back alone.
Yeah.
So what kind of support does Her Academy offer these women, and how long are you actually following them?
Okay, so as Karen just said, there are treatments from the channel by the state, but they are really minimal, you know.
Not enough for what they need.
Like 30 beds, when the numbers are sometimes, the NGO said that 15,000 and not like 10 or 12, because they're different.
That's official numbers.
And
yeah, exactly.
These are women who want to come out of the industry. Like, these are women who reached out to you?
80% of women who are in prostitution wants to get out of prostitution, but they said that they don't have the means to do that. Okay, so right now there are psychological help, but when they finish their rehabilitation, and the society is so hypocritical and so stigmatized towards women in prostitution, so they have no alternative to provide themselves. And that's this is the point where we get in, because we understood that finding a job and to hold that job, and that it won't be a manual job, but
an empowering job.
Yeah, and
we'll leave them out of that cycle
and we leave them out, and they will able to stay because they have like a new identity, like professional identity,
which is something that they need after so many years. Especially.
Yes, because we don't think that they have no connection, no skills, no
gaps in the CV.
What
just imagine
20 years.
What did I do?
Yeah, exactly.
Going and offering yourself to a job. First of all, it's a matter of self-esteem.
Exactly. That's that's the main point, that if all my life, since I was a kid, I was educated
abused
that,
as a child,
yeah, and
later
that
on,
my value is my body, and when I give something to someone else, then I give something, I get something back. Like,
you have to change their whole outlook on life.
Yeah, exactly.
Karen, maybe you can tell us a bit about the legislative efforts in order to curb this industry.
Well, I think the interesting thing in terms of rehabilitation is that the new legislation, which talks about actually criminalizing customers, which if it happens, and it's a piece of legislation that's been discussed for nearly a decade, but this time has wide support even from the coalition, part of it is fining customers and getting money. First time, I think the first time offense is like 200 equals to $200, and then it's twice the money, and that money is supposed to be allocated for the services, which is something that's very, very smart, and something that the current legislation doesn't address.
Will the criminalization help stop what's happening on the streets? Do you think this is enough of a scare for people who are going to prostitutes?
Fortunately, we have examples in the world. We have Sweden, we have France, we had a lot of other states that declared that prostitution is abuse towards women. And that is the most important thing, I think, in that legislation, that the state will say,
this is wrong.
This is wrong, and we're not. And this is first. And the second thing, that the shame of the clients, the men who buys women, this is what we think.
The shaming is probably what's
most important thing.
That they won't get fined in the mail, and their kids will see
so
that.
This legislation hopefully will change. At least it will put some public pressure. Tal Granot, Karen Kirsch, thanks so much for joining me today. We're going to take a short break, but when we get back, we'll take a look at another topic that deals with women's body, this time surrogacy. Don't go anywhere.